Should we cancel or celebrate Thanksgiving? That's the topic we're going to address today on Flourish-Meant. I'm your host, Tina Yeager, and I have a very special and esteemed guest with me. His name is Dr. Jerry Newcombe, and he's the executive director of Providence Forum and the senior producer of a brand new film. He's also on-air contributor for Coral Ridge Ministries. And this new film that he's involved with, he's going to tell us a lot more about that today because it centers on our topic. So welcome, Dr. Newcombe. I am so thrilled to have you on Flourish-Meant today.
Oh, thank you so much. Good to be with you.
So, Dr. Newcombe, you have done a host of things in your long esteemed career. Why did you choose to zero in on Thanksgiving?
Well, I feel that the Pilgrims, even though most Americans have, at least some ideas about them, they don't necessarily understand the full story about them and the incredible price that they paid as devout followers of Jesus Christ in the 1600s, who just basically wanted to worship the Lord in the purity of conscience, informed by the Bible, as they understood all these things. It just seemed like they had to face one obstacle after another, just to practice their faith in the purity of conscience. And eventually, what they ended up doing, even though it was a very small number, they ended up casting a very long and positive shadow to help start what ultimately bloomed into the United States of America. One of our guests, Dennis Prager, in the video says the Pilgrims, for all intents and purposes, founded America. Bottom line is, they started so much of what did eventually blossom into the U.S. So I think it is not time to ever to cancel Thanksgiving and cancel the Pilgrims. It's time to celebrate them and their legacy.
In a sense, they put their knees on the land, praying over this land very, very early in the process of us becoming a nation. And it was far, far before we had anything to do with that Revolutionary War or any of those things. But how much did that play a part in making us who we are today just through their prayers?
Well, I think that's a great point. And in fact, they were people of the book where it was prayer and the Bible. And in fact, the Bible was relatively newly, rediscovered just the century before the Pilgrims. And so, for example, Paul Jaley, one of the guests in our program, he's made this comment. He said, when you had the Geneva Bible, which is what the Pilgrims had, he said this was essentially almost in effect the first affordable Bible. He said prior to that, I mean, it would take you several months of labor to be able to even get a copy of the scriptures in your own hands. Just a century before, as I say, in England, they released different versions of the Bible. And there was one that they literally had to chain to the pulpits in England because people were so starving for information about the Bible to be able to read it for themselves that they had to chain it to the pulpit lest it be stolen. We have so many Bibles, we don't even think about the paucity, the rareness of having the Bible in your own language available to you in your own fingertips. So the Bible played such a critical role. For example, when the Pilgrims even became a specific separate denomination, it was something that they based on the biblical concept of covenant. They made a covenant with each other under God for the particular congregation. And this was all done in mid-England when it was basically illegal to do so, but they did this secretly. And later, when they were in New England and they had to punt, they were expecting to go to the northern parts of Virginia, but they had to make sure that they bound the whole colony together because now they were under no government's jurisdiction because they had been blown off course. They made a political charter, the Mayflower Compact, of their spiritual type covenant that they had made before, about 15 years before, when they first became a congregation. And the Mayflower Compact ended up changing world history. It became the beginning of the constitutional process, culminating 150 years later in the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution. And And how does the Mayflower Compact begin? It begins the same way the United States of America began, in the name of God. Amen.
These are things that we take for granted, and I'm not sure these are actually being taught accurately in our schools today. Do you think there are things that we need to learn and know about in order to really live out our faith as American citizens?
Yes, absolutely. And this is part of the reason I even made this film and a whole series of films. There's 7 total at providenceforum.org. You can get more information, including watching major scenes from these, or in the case of the Pilgrims, you can watch the whole thing online if you wish at providenceforum.org. But this 7-part series, I call it the Foundation of American Liberty. And if somebody says, well, what's the foundation of American liberty? It's our Judeo-Christian heritage. It's the fact that the settlers, beginning with the Pilgrims and others, they founded their colonies essentially on the teachings of the Bible. And that made a huge difference. And that has led to the prosperity that we have enjoyed for so long here in America.
We've definitely taken for granted having Bibles, having access to why we believe what we believe if we are Christians. And now we are getting away from why we are what we are as a country. Do you
Yeah.
think that's in part due to some processes that are involved with, as you call them, elitists, changing what we see about our history?
Yes, but I will say I don't think this is something brand new. For example, going back to the 1930s, there was a Columbia University professor, very influential in helping to bring American education in the wrong direction, John Dewey, who was one of the prime movers and a signatory of the Humanist Manifesto in the 1930s. They revised it, by the way, in the 1970s. Same basic point, kind of get away from God. Or even if there is a God, he's irrelevant to our lives, and we need to build our lives on a non-theistic basis. Well, the Pilgrims and the Puritans and the Quakers and the Presbyterians who came in, by the way, hundreds of thousands of Presbyterians came to America in the 1700s in a time when the population of America was about 3 million people, hundreds of thousands of people. So, I mean, they have tremendous amount of influence. And these different groups felt that the Bible is the key to, understanding how we should then live, to use the phrase from Ezekiel, the prophet. But the bottom line is the essence of the American experiment can be summarized in 2 phrases: self-rule under God. As I say, the Pilgrims started it when they said that we came on this voyage for the glory of God and the advancement of the Christian faith. And they wrote up this agreement for self-government under God. And then there were several, about 100 at least, compacts, frames of government, covenants from different church groups and so forth that settled in different parts of British North America and what became the United States. And it culminated with the Declaration of Independence, which says our rights come from the Creator. And when the Creator grants you rights, those rights are non-negotiable. Now, let's go back to John Dewey for a second in the 1930s. Here he is, a promoter, a signatory of the, one of the main prime movers of the Humanist Manifesto. We don't need God. And we, even if there is a God, it's irrelevant to how we should live our lives. If you take away God, you take away the source of our rights. This is no small point. Look, the 20th century saw lots and lots of countries that arose where they took away godly values. They took away belief in God. I mean, in the Soviet Union, they directly declared war against God. They crucified priests. They tore down churches or turned them into museums. They made religious liberty forbidden. The Nazis were also, they were Judeo-Christian. They took away people's freedom. See, here's the problem, Tina. When you have a secular state, to whom can you appeal if your rights are somehow being trampled on? But with the founders, they saw their God-given rights being trampled upon, and so they made an appeal to heaven. In fact, one of the early flags in the time of the American founding showed it was a field of white, and it showed a pine tree especially common in New England, with that pine tree, of course, pointing to heaven. And this caption was an appeal to heaven. This was a flag that George Washington even used, in some of the ships that he donated to, kind of like the early version of our Navy, as he became our commander in chief of this sort of army that he had to build from scratch in 1775. They appealed multiple times to England and didn't get help. And so finally they made an appeal to heaven. And ultimately God helped them. And in his first inaugural address, George Washington said, nobody should be more grateful than the people of the United States for us becoming an independent nation. But this point that God is the source of our rights, if you remove God as the source of your rights, you end up ultimately with trouble. And in fact, the 20th century alone, where they did that multiple times in the Soviet Union, in China, and Cuba, and Germany, and people would lose their rights, and often they would even lose their lives. The word genocide was coined in the 20th century, in part to describe what had happened to the Jews under the Nazis. The Jews under the Nazis, there was nothing they could do. If it was known that this person was a Jew, they had no appeal. Sometimes when you look at the details about the Holocaust and those death camps, and you think, how could anybody do this? And the only answer is they dehumanized them. They did not treat them as human beings. So when you're made in the image of God, which is the Judeo-Christian revelation, that God has made us in our image, we are created by him. Therefore, we have these inalienable rights. You see, the Declaration of Independence has theological premises, that undergird the whole thing. Take away God, and you take away the source of our rights, and you basically are taking away the essence of the American experiment. And the Pilgrims had a major role in starting the whole ball rolling. So I think it's exciting to learn about them and their faith and the commitment they made to God and then to each other, and how they faced one obstacle after another, one setback after another, but they finally achieved their goal. And when it all came and the harvest finally came in the fall of 1620, they celebrated 3 days of giving thanks to God, and they celebrated in fellowship and with great food with their new friends, the Indians, with whom they had made a treaty of peace that outlasted every one of those alive that made that treaty. It lasted more than 50 years. And so the Pilgrims had a great legacy, and they built everything on the holy word of God.
Such a fascinating and eye-opening look at history. And I know that you have more to offer with the movie and with your ministry. How can people stay connected with you and view the movie?
ProvidenceForum.org is one of the main ways. It's available on different outlets, some for free, some you can get it through streaming. But ProvidenceForum.org has the key. And the key is look for the Foundation of American Liberty series. So I'm very excited that we were able to get a lot of good guests, including a great Native American scholar, or actually a couple of them, Alveda King, the niece of Martin Luther King Jr. She closes out the whole Pilgrim special. We had a guest in there that was the great grandson of Elder William Brewster, who was the de facto pastor for the Pilgrims right there in Plymouth, beginning in the 1620 and 21, et cetera, going on. And Paul Jaley, a great Pilgrim expert, and John Eidsmoe, law professor, and just a lot of great guests. So we're really grateful for how this all turned out.
Such great information. I hope that all of you listening were informed and inspired to go and visit Providence Forum and check out all the resources that they have to offer. And of course, I also hope that you will come back for the next episode of Flourish-Meant.